Connecticut and Massachusetts had the largest slave populations in New England, and at one point in the colonial period, about 10% of Boston's population was composed of enslaved Africans, so that's not counting free Africans. And 30% of the population in a town, South Kingston in Rhode Island, was composed of Africans who were enslaved. Many, if not most of these people, were West Africans. So there's that incoming West Africans who came in bondage as slaves. And then there's a big West African population that's still very important here, and that's the Cape Verdean population. Cape Verdeans have been here since really, really early, 17th century at least, and they were known throughout the world for their whaling. They were here as whalers. And whaling was a major economic activity in New England. Before the American Revolutionary War, New England whaling ships were sailing off the Cape Verde Islands and picking up crewmen from the islands and from the west coast of Africa. And these people formed a large population of the best harpooners, steersmen, and all-around whalemen for a long, long period, and many of them settled here. And as most of us know, there's a huge Cape Verdean population here, and the Cape Verdeans are indeed West African New Englanders. Many of them settled on Nantucket and islands, but also on the mainland. Free black tradesmen in New England was another West African group. I mean, there were other Africans in this group, but they were predominantly West African. In 1790, the first U.S. census counted 13,059 free black people in New England. Strictly speaking, none of them was really free, for their lives were very prescribed politically, economically, and socially. However, many went on to become respected members of their communities, and after their indentures ended, free blacks in the North settled and stayed. But what I want to focus on is more of the slave trade and really how it impacted the economy of New England. Of all the economic activities in which West Africans figured, this was surely the most enriching for New England and the most devastating for West Africa. It's no exaggeration to state that the slave trade underwrote the entire economy of New England. I'll definitely stand by that. We tend to look at this in terms of the labor of Africans and that contribution. And certainly having free labor was crucial. However, because slaves in New England worked as carpenters, shipwrights, sailmakers, printers, tailors, shoemakers, coopers, blacksmiths, bakers, weavers, goldsmiths, they were really contributing to the economy in a very multifaceted way. And their labor was not being remunerated. So, I mean, that's a huge input into the economy. Many became so talented in the crafts that the free white workers lost their jobs to them. Needless to say, this had a big impact on the economy. But there are other ways in which the slave trade enriched not only the big traders, but countless others, including ordinary folks. It created jobs and built up capital. We're also blind to the ways in which this traffic provided the capital that built New England. Boston and Newport were chief slave ports, but nearly all of New England towns, Salem, Providence, Middletown, New London, had a hand in it. In 1740, slave interests in Newport owned or managed 150 vessels. Ooh. Okay, let me see what I can move forward. Okay, so the way that this enriched New England tends to be not very well acknowledged or known. Because people think, well, there were slaves in the South, and they were growing the economy, getting rich. But in fact, it's not quite like that. New England really benefited, perhaps more, but certainly hugely. So there were investors who were investing in these slaving ventures. Most of the prominent New England merchants had ties to the slave trade and made vast fortunes from it. Peter Faneuil inherited a huge fortune, which had been made from the slave trade, and he increased his wealth through further slave involvement. His gift of Faneuil Hall to Boston is evidence of the wealth he made from the slave trade. Families like the DeWolf family, who some of you may have heard of through the film Traces of the Trade, which Katrina Brown made of her family, the DeWolf family, the biggest slave trading family in the United States, based in Rhode Island. Some families like the DeWolf family not only made fortunes in the trade, they later invested these fortunes in cane plantations in Cuba and textile mills in New England. So that's a way that is. Traders. So the first systematic venture from New England to Africa was undertaken in 1644 by an association of Boston traders, who sent 3 ships in quest of gold dust and black slaves. But the important thing is that it wasn't just the big guys who were investing in these ventures. A lot of people bought shares. The local baker, the local farmer. People were buying shares in these outings. So it wasn't just, we have to look at the spread of this. So I'm just going to name a couple more things. Shipbuilding and all the attendant professions. That's created jobs. Rum distilleries, molasses, the fishing industry. It was the dried cod that fed the Africans who were running those who were working on those plantations in Cuba and other parts of the Caribbean, that produced the sugar, that produced the rum, that went back and bought more enslaved people, and so on. Rope makers, sail makers, iron workers, and so on. So I'm going to stop there. I was going to talk a little bit about the Industrial Revolution and how this buildup of capital then contributed to the Industrial Revolution. We all know about textile mills and so on in New England. But my conclusion is that I wanted to just invite us all to face the fact of our really complex, close, and ongoing relationship with West Africa. I haven't talked as much about the ongoing relationship, although the fact that we have all this capital has something to do with that ongoing relationship. And I think as we go forward, we need to take a two-pronged approach, because I believe that scholarship and knowledge has to be for something, and it has to be for building a more just world. And so there seems to be 2 prongs as we learn more about this relationship. One is repairing the damage of the past, and there are reparations movements that address that issue. The tremendous damage done to descendants of West Africans in our midst who continue to suffer from the legacy of slavery here, and the damage done on the continent. And the second prong is to examine our current relationships with West Africa. Are they equitable? Are they fair? How can we make them more equitable? How can we make them fair? And I think that the kinds of programs that you were talking about certainly address that issue. And there's also the Jubilee movement for debt relief. And financial institutions are also heavily implicated in New England, so that's another important angle. So thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to our discussion. It was initially started by staff of the Hartford Courant, which was one of the first newspapers, if not the first newspaper in the United States to apologize for its role in the transatlantic slave trade, where it had put ads. And this is called Complicity, How the North Promoted, Prolonged, and Profited from Slavery. It's very well documented, very readable.